In 1889 Michigan farmland, a 19-year-old woman was about to face her final judgment. What started as reading a letter in her childhood kitchen took a shocking turn when she came face to face with the reality that she was the last daughter left to sell. Clara O'Connell wasn't your typical farm girl. For 4 years she had watched her sisters disappear one by one, sold to lumber barons, railroad superintendents, ministers and merchants across Michigan, known for her intelligence, literacy, and unwavering strength despite her family's betrayal. When she encountered her father announcing, "Pack your belongings, Clara. We found you a situation," she had no idea she was walking into a destiny that would transform her from unwanted burden to beloved family cornerstone. Clara's refusal to accept mere survival would lead to a love story that defied every social convention of her time. What began as a desperate arrangement to avoid scandal would become a testament to chosen family over blood. The Turner farm would never be the same after a broken widower, and his grieving children discovered that sometimes the greatest loves grow from the most practical beginnings. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Healthy woman, excellent cook, reads and writes well, seeking arrangement with respectable family willing to provide room and board in exchange for household services. The words burned Clara's eyes as she read them for the third time. 4 years had passed since her eldest sister Mary had been sold to a lumber baron's family in Grand Rapids. 3 years since Elizabeth went to work for the railroad superintendent's widow in Detroit. 2 years since Catherine was purchased by the Methodist minister's family in Ann Arbor to care for his invalid wife. Just last spring, her final remaining sister, Margaret, had been taken by a wealthy merchant family in Chicago. Now Clara stood alone, the last daughter in a house that had once echoed with feminine laughter and whispered secrets shared between sisters. The silence pressed against her chest like a physical weight, making each breath feel labored and desperate. Her father, Jeremiah O'Connell, burst through the kitchen door with mud caked on his boots and exhaustion etched into every line of his weathered face. Behind him, her mother Margaret followed with the grim expression of someone about to deliver. Terrible news. The autumn rain had turned their small farm into a muddy wasteland, and the failed harvest meant another winter of uncertainty and want. "Pack your belongings, Clara," her father announced without preamble. The words hit her like a physical blow, though she had been expecting them for months. "We found you a situation." The word situation struck her with familiar cruelty. Not a new home, not a fresh start, but a situation, something to be managed and arranged like hiring seasonal help or selling excess grain to neighbors. Clara had watched this same conversation play out with each of her sisters, had seen the resignation settle over their faces as they realized their childhood had officially ended. "Where?" Clara whispered, though part of her already knew the answer would break what remained of her heart. Margaret O'Connell smoothed her apron with nervous hands, avoiding her daughter's eyes. "The Turner farm, about 30 miles south near Kalamazoo. Mr. Elijah Turner lost his wife in childbirth last spring, leaving him with 5 children to raise alone. He needs help managing the household and caring for the young ones." Clara's heart sank further. She had heard whispers about widowed men who took in desperate women, using them for labor and other purposes, while offering nothing in return but food and shelter. The thought of being trapped in such an arrangement, with no family to return to and no means of escape, filled her with terror. "You don't understand," Clara said, her voice rising with desperation. "I want to stay here. I can help with the farm, with anything you need. I don't have to be a burden." Jeremiah's face hardened like winter soil. "You are 19 years old with no prospects and no dowry. What man in this county would want you now? Your mother and I have 5 mouths to feed, and winter coming fast. We can't afford to keep you here eating our food and taking up space. The cruel words settled over Clara like a heavy blanket, suffocating her protests before they could form. She had lived with this knowledge for years, watching her parents calculate the cost of her existence against the benefit of her labor. Each sister's departure had made her more valuable as a worker, but also more expensive to maintain. "The Turner family is offering fair compensation," Margaret added quickly, as if money could soften the blow of being sold to strangers. $20 and board for 6 months' work. That's more than most hired help receives, and Mr. Turner has a reputation for treating his workers fairly. Clara stared at her parents, these people who had raised her, taught her to read, shown her how to tend animals and grow vegetables. Now they looked at her with the same calculating expressions she'd seen them use when deciding which livestock to sell before winter. The love she had once seen in their eyes had been replaced by the cold practicality of survival. "When?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the wind rattling the windows. "Tomorrow." "Morning," Jeremiah replied. "Mr. Turner will arrive with his wagon at sunrise." The finality in his tone left no room for argument or negotiation. Clara had learned long ago that protest only made these partings more painful for everyone involved. She had watched her sisters fight against their fate, begging and pleading for another option, only to be loaded into wagons with tear-stained faces and broken spirits. Clara climbed the narrow stairs to her childhood bedroom, each step feeling like she was ascending to her own execution. The small room held everything she owned in the world: 3 dresses, her mother's old sewing basket, a few books she'd managed to save from her brief time in the village school, and a silver locket that had belonged to her grandmother. The locket contained a tiny portrait of her grandmother Elizabeth, a woman who had been known throughout the county for her kindness and wisdom. As she folded her meager possessions into a worn canvas bag, memories flooded through her mind like water through a broken dam. She remembered being 12 years old, helping her mother deliver a difficult calf, her small hands steady and sure as she guided new life into the world. She remembered teaching her younger cousin to read during his summer visits, watching his face light up when letters finally transformed into words that held meaning. She remembered the Christmas when all 5 sisters had worked together to surprise their parents with a quilt, each contributing squares embroidered with symbols of their family's history. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else entirely, some confident girl who believed she had value beyond her ability to contribute to the family's survival. That girl had died slowly over the years, watching her sisters disappear, one by one, understanding that she too would eventually become a commodity to be traded for the family's welfare. Clara sat on her narrow bed and opened the silver locket, studying the tiny portrait of her grandmother inside. Elizabeth O'Connell had been a beloved figure in the community, known for her skill in healing and her generous heart. What would she think of her granddaughter now, being passed from family to family like an unwanted burden? A soft knock interrupted her dark thoughts. Margaret entered without waiting for permission, carrying a cup of tea that smelled like chamomile and honey, the same tea she had brought to each of Clara's sisters on their last nights home. "I know this seems harsh," her mother said, settling on the edge of the bed, "but the Turner children need care, and you need a place where your situation won't matter as much." Clara accepted the tea with trembling hands. "My situation? You mean my failure to secure a husband and provide grandchildren?" Margaret's face crumpled with something that might have been regret. "Your worth isn't measured by marriage, Clara. You're intelligent, capable, kind-hearted. The Turner children will be fortunate to have you." "Then why are you sending me away?" Clara asked, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "If I have worth, why can't I stay here where I belong?" Her mother looked toward the window, watching darkness settle over the farmland they'd worked for generations. "Because your father sees you as a reminder of our failures. Every day you remain unmarried and dependent, neighbors ask questions. They wonder what's wrong with our family, what we did to deserve such misfortune. The honesty was brutal, but somehow cleaner than false comfort would have been. Clara drank her tea in silence, tasting the bitterness of unwanted truth beneath, the honey's sweetness. "Tell me about the Turner family," she said finally. "If I'm to live among strangers, I should know something about them." Margaret's expression brightened slightly. "Elijah Turner is 35, a widower since his wife died, bringing their 5th child into the world. The baby died too, leaving him with 4 children ranging from 7 to 15. He owns a successful grain farm and has a reputation for treating his workers fairly." "What are the children's names?" "The oldest is Sarah, 15 followed by Samuel at 12, then there's Maggie at 9, and Jesse, the youngest, at 7. They say the children have been managing mostly on their own since their mother passed, with help from neighbor women when possible." Clara tried to imagine 4 children attempting to maintain a household while grieving their mother's death. Her own situation suddenly seemed less tragic when measured against their loss. At least she had memories of her mother's love, even if that love had been insufficient to keep her home. "What happened to Mrs. Turner?" she asked. Margaret's voice grew quiet. "Complications during childbirth. The baby was breech, and she labored for 2 days before." She shook her head. "They say Mr. Turner hasn't been the same since. He works from dawn to dusk, barely speaking to anyone. The children have been raising themselves." Clara felt a stab of sympathy for the Turner family. Their loss was recent and devastating, while her own abandonment had been gradual and expected. Perhaps she could offer them something valuable, not the motherly love they had lost, but the practical care and attention they desperately needed. "Will I be expected to—" Clara hesitated, unsure how to phrase her fears about the arrangements. Some widowed men made with their female help. Mr. Turner specifically requested a woman to care for his children, nothing more, Margaret assured her. He's a God-fearing man, active in his church. The arrangement is purely for household help and childcare. Relief washed over Clara, though she remained cautious. She had heard similar assurances about other arrangements that had proven less innocent than advertised. Still, the alternative was remaining here to face her parents' growing resentment and the community's whispered judgments about the O'Connell family's failures. Clara finished her tea and handed the empty cup back to her mother. "I suppose there's nothing left to discuss then." Margaret's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back all evening. "I'm sorry, Clara. If there were any other way—" "I know," Clara said, though she wasn't sure she meant it. "I understand why you have to do this." Her mother kissed her forehead, a gesture that felt like a final goodbye rather than a good night. After Margaret left, Clara lay in her narrow bed, listening to the wind howl around the house, imagining her sisters scattered across Michigan, each struggling to build new lives among strangers. Tomorrow she would join them in exile, carrying nothing but her few possessions and the hope that the Turner family might offer her something closer to belonging than survival. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. For the first time in years, she was moving toward an unknown future rather than simply waiting for the inevitable end of her usefulness. As sleep finally claimed her, Clara whispered a prayer to her grandmother's memory, asking for strength to face whatever tomorrow would bring. The silver locket lay warm against her chest, a tangible reminder that she came from women who had faced adversity with grace and dignity. Perhaps that legacy would be enough to carry her through the challenges ahead. Dawn broke grey and cold over the O'Connell farm, matching Clara's mood as she stood at the kitchen window with her canvas bag clutched in trembling hands. The sound of wagon wheels crunching over frozen ground announced the arrival of her new employer, though she couldn't bring herself to look outside until her father called her name. "Clara, come meet Mr. Turner." Her legs felt unsteady as she walked toward the door, each step taking her further from the only life she had ever known. When she finally stepped onto the porch, she was surprised by the man waiting beside a sturdy farm wagon. Elijah Turner was taller than she had expected, with broad shoulders and work-hardened hands that spoke of years spent in honest labor. His dark hair was touched with premature gray at the temples, and his brown eyes held a depth of sadness that seemed to echo her own recent losses. He was not the gruff, calculating man she had feared, nor the broken widower her mother had described. Instead, he appeared quietly competent, studying her with the same careful assessment she was giving him. His clothes were well-made but practical, and his wagon, though simple, was sturdy and well-maintained. Everything about him suggested reliability and careful stewardship. "Miss O'Connell," he said, removing his hat and offering a slight bow. His voice was deeper than she had expected, with a gentle quality that immediately put her at ease. "I'm Elijah Turner. I appreciate your willingness to help my family during this difficult time." Clara found herself surprised by his courtesy. Most men conducting such business arrangements treated the women involved as little more than livestock being transferred from one owner to another. Mr. Turner spoke to her as if she were a person with feelings and preferences that mattered. "Mr. Turner," she replied, managing a small curtsy despite her nervousness, "I'm grateful for the opportunity to be of service to your family." Jeremiah stepped forward, eager to conclude the transaction. "Clara's a hard worker, Mr. Turner. She can cook, clean, tend animals, and she's good with children. You'll find her worth every penny of the arrangement." Clara flinched at her father's words, hating the way he spoke about her as if she were a prize heifer being sold at market. But Mr. Turner's expression grew slightly disapproving, and she realized he was equally uncomfortable with her father's approach to the situation. "I'm sure Miss O'Connell will be an excellent addition to our household," Mr. Turner said firmly. "Shall we be on our way? The children are eager to meet you, and I'd like to arrive home before the weather turns." Clara kissed her mother goodbye, a brief, awkward embrace that felt more like a formality than an expression of love. Her father shook her hand as if she were a business associate, and then she was climbing into the wagon beside Mr. Turner, her few possessions secured in the back. As they drove away from the farm, Clara turned for one last look at the house where she had spent her entire life. It appeared smaller and shabbier than she remembered, with sagging roof lines and paint peeling from the shutters. The vegetable garden was brown and barren, and the chicken coop leaned precariously to one side. Perhaps leaving wasn't entirely a tragedy after all. The wagon ride passed mostly in comfortable silence, broken occasionally by Mr. Turner's quiet observations about the landscape or gentle questions about her experience with household management. Clara found herself gradually relaxing as she realized he had no intention of prying into her personal history or making her feel uncomfortable about her circumstances. "My children have been managing largely on their own since their mother died," he said as they crossed a small bridge over a rushing creek. "Sarah, my eldest, has taken on far too much responsibility for a girl her age. Samuel helps with the younger ones, but he's only 12 himself. They all need someone who can provide the kind of care and attention I can't give them while managing the farm." Clara heard the guilt in his voice and recognized the weight of responsibility he carried. It must be difficult, trying to be both father and mother to them. "It is," he admitted. "I find myself failing them daily. They need guidance I don't know how to provide, comfort I can't give. When I heard about your situation, I thought perhaps—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I thought perhaps we might be able to help each other." The phrase struck Clara as oddly hopeful. Most employers spoke of what they expected from their help, not what they might offer in return. What do you mean? You need a place where you can be valued for your contributions rather than judged for your circumstances. My children need someone who can give them the attention and care they deserve. It seems like an arrangement that could benefit everyone involved. Clara studied his profile as he spoke, noting the sincere expression and the genuine concern in his voice when he mentioned his children. This was not a man looking to take advantage of a desperate woman, but rather a father seeking the best possible care for his family. "Tell me about your children," she said. "What are they like?" A small smile crossed his face, the first she had seen from him. "Sarah is fiercely independent, sometimes to her own detriment. She's been trying to fill her mother's role since the funeral, but she's still just a child herself. She can be suspicious of strangers, especially women who might threaten her position as head of the household." Clara nodded, understanding the challenge this might present. "And Samuel?" "Quiet, thoughtful, perhaps too sensitive for his own good. He feels things deeply but rarely expresses his emotions. He's been having nightmares since his mother died, though he won't admit it. I think he blames himself somehow for not being able to save her." The pain in Mr. Turner's voice was evident as he spoke about his son's struggles. Clara felt her heart go out to both father and child, recognizing the helplessness that came with watching someone you love suffer without knowing how to help. "Maggie is 9 and has more energy than the rest of us combined," he continued. "She's curious about everything, asks endless questions, and has an opinion about every subject under the sun. She's been the bright spot in our house since the funeral, though I worry her cheerfulness sometimes masks her own grief. And Jesse, 7 years old, and still believes his mother might come home someday. He asks about her constantly, wants to know where she went and when she'll return. I don't have the heart to explain that death is permanent, so I just avoid the subject entirely." He shook his head, clearly frustrated with his own inadequacy. Clara felt a deep sympathy for the entire family. Each child was dealing with their loss in their own way, while their father struggled to provide the emotional support they needed while managing his own grief. She began to understand why he had sought outside help, not because he was lazy or uncaring, but because he recognized his own limitations. "They sound like remarkable children," she said quietly. "I can tell you love them very much." "I do," he replied simply. "More than I know how to express. That's part of the problem. Since Rebecca died, I found it difficult to show affection. I work constantly, thinking that providing for them financially is enough, but I know they need more than that." Clara was struck by his honesty. Most men would never admit to such vulnerability, especially not to a woman they barely knew. The fact that he was willing to share his struggles suggested a level of trust that both surprised and touched her. As they crested a small hill, Mr. Turner pointed ahead to a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley below. "There's home," he said, and Clara could hear the pride in his voice. The Turner farm was significantly larger and more prosperous than the O'Connell property. The house was a solid 2-story structure with a wide front porch and freshly painted shutters. The barn was enormous, with several smaller outbuildings scattered around the property. Fields stretched in every direction, and Clara could see cattle grazing in fenced pastures near the creek that wound through the valley. "It's beautiful," she said, and meant it. The farm radiated an air of prosperity and careful maintenance that spoke well of Mr. Turner's abilities as a farmer and landowner. "Rebecca always said it was the prettiest spot in Michigan," he replied, and Clara heard the note of sadness that crept into his voice whenever he mentioned his deceased wife. As they approached the house, Clara could see faces at the windows, and her nervousness returned. In a few minutes, she would meet the 4 children who would become her primary responsibility. The success or failure of this arrangement would depend largely on their acceptance of her presence in their home. Mr. Turner seemed to sense her apprehension. "They're good children, Miss O'Connell. Give them time to adjust to having you here, and I think you'll find them eager for the care and attention you can provide." The wagon pulled to a stop in front of the house, and immediately the front door burst open. A small boy with tousled brown hair came running down the porch steps, followed more slowly by his siblings. This, Clara assumed, must be Jessie, the youngest, whose excitement at having a visitor apparently outweighed any shyness he might feel about meeting a stranger. "Papa!" Jessie called out, launching himself at his father as soon as Mr. Turner stepped down from the wagon. "You're back! Is this the lady who's going to help us?" "Yes, son," Mr. Turner replied, lifting the boy easily and settling him on his hip. "This is Miss O'Connell. Can you say hello properly?" Jessie turned his bright blue eyes toward Clara and offered a gap-toothed grin. "Hello, Miss O'Connell. I'm Jessie. Are you going to live with us now?" "For a while, yes," Clara replied, charmed by the child's direct manner. "I'm very pleased to meet you, Jessie." The other three children had gathered on the porch, watching the exchange with varying degrees of curiosity and wariness. Clara could immediately identify Sarah, the eldest, by her protective stance and the way she kept the two middle children slightly behind her. She was a pretty girl, with her father's dark hair and serious brown eyes, but her expression was guarded and somewhat hostile. Samuel, the 12-year-old, stood quietly beside his sister, observing Clara with the same careful assessment she had noticed in his father. He was taller than she had expected, with sandy hair and his mother's blue eyes, according to what she could see in the family resemblance. Maggie, the 9-year-old, was practically vibrating with curiosity, clearly eager to ask questions, but held back by her sister's cautious behavior. She had red gold hair that caught the afternoon light, and freckles scattered across her nose. "Children," Mr. Turner said, "come meet Miss O'Connell properly." Sarah descended the porch steps first, her movements careful and deliberate. "Miss O'Connell," she said with a slight curtsy, "welcome to our home." Her tone was polite but cool, making it clear that while she would observe the proprieties, she was reserving judgment about this new addition to their household. Samuel followed suit with a quiet "ma'am," while Maggie bounded forward with characteristic enthusiasm. "Are you really going to stay with us?" Maggie asked, her eyes bright with excitement. "Sarah's been doing the cooking, but she burned the biscuits yesterday, and Samuel won't let me help with anything important because he says I'm too little. But I'm not too little, I'm 9 years old, and I can do lots of things if someone will just teach me properly." "Maggie," Sarah said sharply, "let Miss O'Connell get settled before you bombard her with questions." Clara smiled at the interaction, recognizing the family dynamics already at play. "It's quite all right," she said to Sarah, then turned to Maggie. "Yes, I'm going to stay and help your family for a while, and 9 years old seems quite grown up to me. I'm sure there are many ways you can help." Maggie beamed at this response, while Sarah's expression grew slightly more disapproving. Clara realized she would need to be careful not to undermine Sarah's authority while still establishing her own role in the household. Mr. Turner retrieved Clara's bag from the wagon and gestured toward the house. "Let's get you settled, Miss O'Connell. Sarah can show you to your room, and then perhaps we can discuss the household arrangements." As they walked toward the house, Clara felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. The Turner family was clearly still struggling with their loss, and her integration into their routine would require patience and sensitivity. But for the first time in months, she felt a sense of purpose that went beyond mere survival. These children needed what she could offer, and perhaps, in caring for them, she might find something like belonging. The interior of the Turner house was both grander and more neglected than Clara had expected. The furniture was well made and substantial, speaking of prosperity and good taste, but dust covered most surfaces, and the general air of the house suggested a family struggling to maintain their home while dealing with overwhelming grief. Children's belongings were scattered throughout the front room, and Clara could see that Sarah, despite her best efforts, was overwhelmed by the task of managing such a large household. "Miss O'Connell," Sarah said formally, "I'll show you to your room. It's upstairs next to Maggie's." Clara followed the girl up a narrow staircase, noting the family portraits that lined the walls. She caught glimpses of a beautiful woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, clearly the children's mother, Rebecca Turner. The woman in the portraits looked young and vibrant, making her death seem even more tragic and sudden. The room, Sarah showed her, was small but comfortable, with a narrow bed, a simple dresser and a window that looked out over the farm's pastures. It was clean but sparse, suggesting it had been prepared hastily for her arrival. "This used to be Mama's sewing room," Maggie announced, having followed them upstairs despite Sarah's disapproving looks. "She used to sit by the window and mend our clothes and make quilts and sing while she worked." "Maggie, hush," Sarah said sharply. "Miss O'Connell doesn't need to hear about that." But Clara could see the pain that flickered across both girls' faces at the mention of their mother, and she felt a deep sympathy for their loss. "I think it's wonderful that you have such beautiful memories of your mother," she said gently. "It shows how much she loved you all." Maggie's face brightened, but Sarah's expression grew more guarded. "I'll leave you to get settled," she said stiffly. "Papa will expect you in the kitchen soon to discuss meals and household duties." After the girls left, Clara sat on the narrow bed and looked around the room that would be her home for the next 6 months. The walls still held faint impressions where Rebecca Turner's sewing supplies had hung, and Clara could almost imagine the woman who had once worked here, humming softly while she mended her family's clothes. The thought was both comforting and intimidating. How could she possibly fill the void left by such a beloved mother? A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss O'Connell," Samuel's quiet voice called. "Papa asked me to tell you that supper will be ready soon." Clara opened the door to find the 12-year-old boy standing in the hallway, his hands shoved deep in his pockets and his eyes focused on the floor. Up close, she could see the dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and the slight tremor in his hands that suggested anxiety. "Thank you, Samuel," she said gently. "Before we go downstairs, could you tell me a little about how things work around here? I want to be helpful, but I don't want to interfere with routines you've already established." Samuel looked up at her with surprise, as if he hadn't expected to be consulted about household arrangements. "Well," he said slowly, "Sarah does most of the cooking, though she's not very good at it yet. I help with the younger ones and try to keep them out of trouble. Maggie is supposed to help with dishes, but she breaks things sometimes. And Jessie—" He paused, his expression growing troubled. "Jessie still thinks Mama's coming back. He sets a place for her at supper every night." Clara's heart clenched at this information. The poor child was still waiting for his mother's return, unable to accept the finality of death. "How does your father handle that?" "He doesn't," Samuel said quietly. "He just works all the time. He leaves before we wake up and comes back after dark. Sarah tries to make him eat, but mostly he just sits at the table looking sad and then goes to bed." The picture Samuel painted was of a family fractured by grief, each member struggling alone with their loss. Clara began to understand the magnitude of the task ahead of her. These children needed more than just someone to cook and clean. They needed someone who could help them process their emotions and begin to heal. "Samuel," she said carefully, "what would you like me to do? How can I help your family?" The boy looked at her with eyes that seemed far too old for his 12 years. I don't know, he admitted. I just want things to stop hurting so much. I want Papa to smile again. And I want Sarah to stop trying to be Mama. And I want Jesse to understand that Mama's not coming back, but I also don't want him to be as sad as the rest of us. Clara felt tears prick her eyes at the boy's honest assessment of his family's pain. Those are all very reasonable things to want, she said. I can't promise I can fix everything, but I can promise I'll try to help. Will you help me understand what each of you needs? Samuel nodded solemnly, and Clara saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. I'd like that, he said. Sarah won't admit she needs help, but she does. She cries at night when she thinks no one can hear her. This information broke Clara's heart. Sarah, at 15, was trying to shoulder responsibilities that would challenge a grown woman, all while dealing with her own grief over losing her mother. No wonder she was suspicious of Clara's presence. She probably saw it as both a relief and a threat to the fragile control she had established over her family's survival. They made their way downstairs together, and Clara was struck by how different the house felt with the family gathered in the kitchen. Mr. Turner sat at the head of a large wooden table, still wearing his work clothes and looking exhausted. Sarah bustled around the stove, trying to manage several pots at once, while Maggie chattered incessantly about her day. Jesse sat in his chair, carefully arranging an extra place setting beside his own. Jesse, Sarah said with barely concealed frustration, we've talked about this. You don't need to set a place for— Yes, I do, Jesse interrupted, his small voice firm with conviction. Mama might be hungry when she gets home. An uncomfortable silence fell over the kitchen. Mr. Turner stared at his hands. Sarah looked, on the verge of tears, and Samuel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Clara realized this was a nightly ritual that no one knew how to handle. Jesse, Clara said gently, sitting down beside the little boy. That's very thoughtful of you to think about your mama. Can you tell me about her? What was she like? Jesse's face lit up with enthusiasm. She was the most beautiful mama in the whole world. She had yellow hair like mine, and she smelled like flowers, and she used to sing me songs before bed. She made the best apple pie, and she never got mad even when I tracked mud through the house, and she always kissed my hurt places to make them better. As Jesse talked, Clara could see the other family members relaxing slightly. Instead of trying to deny or discourage his memories, she was allowing him to celebrate them. She sounds like a wonderful mama, Clara said. I can tell she loved you very much. She did, Jesse agreed. That's why she's going to come back. She wouldn't leave us forever. Clara felt the weight of the family's eyes on her, waiting to see how she would handle this delicate moment. Jesse, she said carefully, do you remember when your mama got sick? The little boy nodded, his expression growing somber. She had to go to bed and couldn't get up, and her tummy got really big, and she looked tired all the time. Do you remember what your papa and Sarah told you about what happened when your mama went to the doctor? Jesse's face crumpled slightly. They said she went to heaven, but I don't understand what that means. Clara looked around the table, at the faces of this grieving family, and made a decision. Heaven is a special place where people go when their bodies stop working, she said gently. It's a beautiful place where there's no pain or sadness, and your mama is there taking care of the new baby who couldn't stay here with us. But when is she coming back? Jesse asked, his voice small and uncertain. Oh, sweetheart, Clara said, reaching out to take his small hand in hers. When people go to heaven, they can't come back to visit us. But that doesn't mean they stop loving us. Your mama's love is still here with you, in your heart, and in all the happy memories you have of her. Jesse's eyes filled with tears, and Clara could see the moment when understanding finally dawned. So she's never coming home? No, darling, she's not coming home. but she's always going to be your mama, and she's always going to love you." Jessie began to cry then, deep, heartbroken sobs that seemed to release months of confused grief. Clara pulled him into her arms, holding him close while he wept for the mother he was finally beginning to understand he had lost forever. Around the table, the other family members were crying too. Sarah wept silently, her shoulders shaking with the force of her emotions. Samuel covered his face with his hands, finally allowing himself to grieve openly. Even Mr. Turner had tears streaming down his face as he watched his youngest son finally begin to process the magnitude of their loss. Clara held Jessie until his sobs subsided, then gently helped him remove the extra place setting from the table. "We don't need to set a place for Mama anymore," she said softly, "but we can still talk about her whenever you want to. Would you like that?" Jessie nodded, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "Can you tell me more stories about heaven? Is Mama happy there?" "I believe she is," Clara said, "and I believe she's watching over all of you, proud of how brave and good you've all been." The family ate their simple supper in relative quiet, but Clara could sense that something had shifted in the household dynamic. By addressing Jessie's confusion head-on rather than avoiding it, she had helped the family take a small but significant step toward healing. After the meal, Sarah approached Clara hesitantly. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I didn't know how to help him understand. I was afraid of making it worse." "You've been doing an amazing job taking care of everyone," Clara replied, "but you don't have to carry all of this responsibility alone anymore. I'm here to help." Sarah's eyes filled with tears again. "I miss her so much," she whispered. "I try to be strong for everyone else, but I feel like I'm failing at everything." Clara put her arms around the girl, feeling how thin and fragile she had become under the weight of her responsibilities. "You're not failing," she said firmly. "You're 15 years old, and you've been trying to do the job of a grown woman while dealing with your own grief. You've kept your family together through the worst time. 3 weeks had passed since Clara's arrival at the Turner farm, and the household had begun to settle into new rhythms. The morning routine now included Clara rising before dawn to prepare breakfast, while Sarah helped the younger children dress and organize their school materials. Samuel had taken to lingering in the kitchen after his siblings left, sharing quiet conversations with Clara about his dreams and fears. Maggie followed Clara around like a devoted puppy, chattering constantly and offering enthusiastic but often impractical help with household tasks. But Jessie's transformation had been the most remarkable. The little boy, who had spent months setting places for his dead mother, now helped Clara clear the table each evening, talking freely about his memories of Rebecca while accepting the reality of her absence. His nightmares had decreased, and he had begun sleeping through the night more regularly. Only Sarah remained resistant to Clara's presence, maintaining a polite but distant demeanor that suggested she viewed the arrangement as temporary and potentially threatening to her position in the family. Clara understood the girl's reluctance. At 15, Sarah had been forced to assume adult responsibilities while still grieving her mother's death. The arrival of another woman in the household represented both relief and displacement, and Sarah was struggling to find her place in this new dynamic. The tension came to a head on a cold November morning when Clara discovered Sarah in the root cellar, crying over a basket of rotted potatoes. The girl had been trying to manage the food stores without asking for help, and several weeks' worth of vegetables had spoiled because she hadn't properly prepared them for winter storage. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I've ruined everything," Sarah sobbed, holding up a blackened potato. Mama would have known how to preserve these properly. Now we'll have nothing for winter soup, and Papa will be disappointed, and everyone will go hungry because I'm too stupid to—" "Sarah, stop," Clara said firmly, sitting down beside the distraught girl on a wooden crate. "You are not stupid, and you have not ruined everything. You're 15 years old, and you've been trying to manage a household that would challenge a woman twice your age. The fact that you've kept your family fed and clothed for months is remarkable, not shameful." Sarah looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "But Mama would have—" "Your Mama was a grown woman with years of experience," Clara interrupted gently. "She learned these skills over time, through practice, and sometimes through making mistakes just like this one. You're not failing her memory by not knowing everything she knew." Sarah wiped her nose on her apron, her expression still miserable. "I just feel like I should be able to do more. Papa works so hard, and the children need so much, and I can't seem to manage any of it properly." Clara studied the girl's pale, drawn face and saw herself at that age, desperately trying to prove her worth through perfect performance, terrified that any failure would result in abandonment or disappointment. "Sarah, can I tell you something? About your father?" The girl nodded reluctantly. "Every evening when he comes in from the fields, the first thing he does is look around to make sure all of his children are safe and cared for. When he sees you helping Maggie with her lessons, or Samuel setting the table, or Jessie laughing at something silly, his whole face lights up with pride. He's not disappointed in you. He's amazed by your strength and capability." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Really? Really? And he's also worried about you. He can see that you're carrying too much responsibility, and he hired me not because you were failing, but because he loves you enough to want you to have the chance to be a 15-year-old girl sometimes, instead of the family caretaker all the time." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, absently turning the ruined potato over in her hands. "I don't know how to be just a girl anymore," she admitted. "Ever since Mama died, I've had to be the one everyone depends on. If I'm not taking care of everyone, then what good am I?" Clara's heart ached for this child who had been forced to grow up too quickly. "You're good for so many things beyond taking care of people. You're intelligent and kind and brave. You have thoughts and dreams and interests that matter just because they're yours, not because they're useful to anyone else." "I used to want to be a teacher," Sarah said quietly. "Before Mama died, I thought maybe I could go to the normal school in Kalamazoo and learn to teach children. But that seems silly now." "That doesn't sound silly at all," Clara said earnestly. "It sounds like a wonderful dream. What made you want to teach?" Sarah's face brightened for the first time in weeks. "I love helping Samuel and Maggie with their lessons. There's something magical about watching someone understand something new, seeing their face light up when letters turn into words or numbers start making sense. And I think children deserve teachers who really care about them, not just people who need employment." Clara smiled at the passion in Sarah's voice. "You would make an excellent teacher, and that dream doesn't have to die just because your circumstances have changed. Maybe it needs to be postponed, but it doesn't need to disappear." "How could I possibly leave my family to pursue something so selfish?" "Taking care of your own future isn't selfish, Sarah. In fact, becoming the best person you can be is one of the greatest gifts you can give to the people you love. Your brothers and sister need to see that it's possible to have dreams and work toward them even when life becomes difficult." Sarah was quiet again, but Clara could see her considering these words. Finally, she asked, "Did you have dreams when you were my age? Things you wanted to do or become?" Clara hesitated, unsure how much of her own story to share. "I did," she said finally. "I wanted to be a midwife like my grandmother. I thought I could help bring babies into the world and care for new mothers. But my family needed me to contribute to our survival in other ways. Do you regret not pursuing that dream? Clara considered the question honestly. I regret not believing I had choices. I accepted that my worth was determined by what I could do for other people, not by what I wanted to do for myself. I don't want you to make that same mistake. Sarah studied Clara's face intently. Is that why you came here? Because you didn't think you had other choices? Partly, Clara admitted, but also because I wanted to help your family, and because I hoped I might find some purpose and belonging here. And have you found belonging, I mean? Clara looked around the root cellar, with its shelves of preserved goods and its earthy smell of stored vegetables, then back at Sarah's earnest, young face. I think I'm beginning to, she said. Your family has been more welcoming than I had any right to expect. Sarah was quiet for another moment, then said, I'm sorry I've been so cold to you. I was afraid you were going to try to replace Mama. And I didn't want to let you get close enough to hurt us when you inevitably left. I understand that fear, Clara said, and I want you to know that I have no intention of trying to replace your mother. No one could do that. But I hope I can earn a place in your family as myself, not as a substitute for someone else. Sarah nodded slowly. I think I'd like that, she said. And maybe you could teach me about preserving vegetables. I don't want to waste food again. Clara smiled. I'd be happy to teach you everything I know. We can start by salvaging what we can from this batch and then preparing the rest of the root vegetables properly. They spent the next hour working, side by side, with Clara explaining the proper techniques for storing different types of vegetables and Sarah asking thoughtful questions about timing and preparation. As they worked, Sarah began to relax, sharing stories about her mother's cooking and her own experiments with recipes. Mama used to let me help her in the kitchen, Sarah said, as she carefully wrapped turnips in cloth. She said cooking was both an art and a science, and that the best cooks understood how ingredients worked together to create something better than the sum of their parts. Your mother sounds like a wise woman, Clara replied. What was her specialty? Bread, Sarah said without hesitation. She could make the most beautiful loaves, crusty on the outside and soft as clouds inside. I've tried to follow her recipe, but mine always comes out dense and heavy. Bread making is tricky, Clara acknowledged. It takes practice to develop a feel for the dough. Would you like me to show you some techniques that might help? Sarah's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. Would you? I've been so frustrated with my attempts, but I didn't want to ask for help because I thought I should be able to figure it out on my own. There's no shame in learning from someone with more experience, Clara assured her. In fact, that's how most knowledge gets passed down, from one generation to the next, through patient teaching and practice. As they finished organizing the root cellar, Clara felt a shift in her relationship with Sarah. The girl's defensiveness had given way to curiosity and cautious trust, and Clara sensed that she had finally begun to earn her place in the Turner family dynamic. That evening at supper, Sarah surprised everyone by announcing, Miss O'Connell is going to teach me to make better bread, and she showed me how to properly store the vegetables so they won't spoil. Samuel looked up from his plate with interest. Could you teach me too? I'd like to learn more about managing food stores. Me too, Maggie chimed in. I want to learn everything. Even Mr. Turner, who had been unusually quiet during meals since Clara's arrival, looked up with something approaching a smile. That sounds like an excellent arrangement, he said. Miss O'Connell, I appreciate your willingness to share your knowledge with the children. Clara felt a warm glow of satisfaction at the acceptance she heard in his voice. It's my pleasure. Mr. Turner, your children are eager to learn, which makes teaching them a joy. Jesse, who had been carefully eating his vegetables, suddenly looked up with a serious expression. Miss O'Connell, can you teach me to cook too? I want to be able to help take care of everyone. Clara's heart melted at the 7-year-old's earnest desire to contribute. "Of course, Jessie. There are many things you can learn to do in the kitchen. We'll start with simple tasks and work our way up to more complicated ones." As the family continued their meal, Clara noticed that the atmosphere around the table had grown noticeably warmer. Sarah was engaging in conversation rather than simply serving food and managing her siblings. Samuel was asking thoughtful questions about farm management. Maggie was telling elaborate stories about her day at school. Even Jessie seemed more relaxed and animated than she had seen him since her arrival. Mr. Turner, she noticed, was actually participating in the conversation rather than simply eating in tired silence. He answered Samuel's questions about crop rotation and listened with apparent interest to Maggie's chatter about her teacher's new teaching methods. When Jessie asked if he could help with the evening milking, his father agreed with a patience and warmth that had been notably absent in recent weeks. After supper, as Clara and Sarah worked together to clean the dishes, the girl said quietly, "Thank you for helping me understand about the vegetables. And thank you for listening to me complain about everything." "You weren't complaining," Clara replied. "You were expressing legitimate concerns about very real challenges. There's a difference." Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile Clara had seen from her. "I think I'm going to like having you here," she admitted. "I was so afraid of letting anyone else get close to our family. But maybe it's okay to let people help sometimes." "It's more than okay," Clara assured her. "It's necessary. Families are meant to support each other, and sometimes that means accepting support from people outside the family, too." As Clara prepared for bed that night, she reflected on the progress that had been made in just a few weeks. Jessie was beginning to heal from his confusion and grief. Samuel was opening up about his feelings and fears. Maggie continued to be her enthusiastic, affectionate self, and now Sarah, the most resistant to change, was beginning to trust and accept Clara's presence in their lives. Only Mr. Turner remained somewhat distant, though Clara had noticed small signs of engagement that suggested he was beginning to emerge from the fog of grief that had enveloped him since his wife's death. She hoped that as the children continued to heal and thrive, their father would find his way back to them as well. The thought of Mr. Turner brought unexpected warmth to Clara's chest, though she tried to push such feelings aside. She was here to care for his children, not to develop romantic feelings for their father. Such emotions would only complicate an already delicate situation and potentially jeopardize the sense of belonging she was finally beginning to feel. But as she settled into sleep, Clara found herself thinking about the quiet strength she saw in Elijah Turner, the gentle way he spoke to his children, and the obvious love he bore for his family despite his struggles with grief. Perhaps, in time, as they all continued to heal, there might be room for something more than a simple business arrangement between them. For now, though, she was content to focus on the children and the gradual building of trust that would make this house feel like a true home for all of them. December brought the first serious snowfall to the Turner farm, and with it came an increase in visitors that made Clara acutely aware of her precarious position in the community. Neighbors who had previously left the grieving family to manage alone suddenly began appearing at the door with casseroles and offers of help, their eyes bright with curiosity about the young woman who had taken up residence in the widower's household. The first uncomfortable encounter occurred when Mrs. Henrietta Blackwood, the minister's wife, arrived unannounced on a crisp Tuesday morning. Clara was in the kitchen teaching Maggie how to measure flour properly when the formidable woman swept through the door without knocking, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the domestic scene before her. "Mr. Turner," Mrs. Blackwood called out, though he was clearly in the barn tending to the animals. "I've come to check on the welfare of your children." Clara straightened from her position beside Maggie, wiping flour from her hands on her apron. "Good morning, Mrs. Blackwood. I'm Clara O'Connell. I'm helping the family with household management." Mrs. Blackwood's pale blue eyes swept over Clara with obvious disapproval, taking in her simple dress, her loosely pinned hair, and her comfortable demeanor in what was clearly another woman's kitchen. "Yes, I've heard about your arrangement," she said, her tone suggesting that whatever she had heard was deeply troubling. Maggie, oblivious to the tension, bounced forward with her characteristic enthusiasm. "Mrs. Blackwood, look what Miss O'Connell is teaching me. I can measure flour all by myself now, and we're going to make apple tarts for dessert." "How lovely, dear," Mrs. Blackwood replied, but her attention remained fixed on Clara. "Miss O'Connell, might I ask about your background? Where is your family?" Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her voice steady. "My family lives north of here, near Grand Rapids. I came to help Mr. Turner care for his children after his wife's passing." "And you live here, in the house, with Mr. Turner and his children?" The implication in Mrs. Blackwood's tone was unmistakable, and Clara felt the familiar shame of being judged for circumstances beyond her control. "I have a room upstairs, yes. The children require round-the-clock care, and Mr. Turner felt it would be most practical for me to live on the premises." Mrs. Blackwood's expression grew even more disapproving. "How very practical. And tell me, what are your intentions regarding this arrangement? Are you planning to remain here indefinitely?" Before Clara could respond, Sarah appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face flushed from the cold and her expression protective. "Mrs. Blackwood," she said with forced politeness, "how nice to see you. Miss O'Connell has been invaluable to our family. We're very fortunate to have her help." Mrs. Blackwood turned her penetrating stare towards Sarah. "My dear child, I'm concerned about the propriety of this situation. A young, unmarried woman living in the same house as your father. Well, it's bound to cause talk." Clara saw Sarah's jaw tighten with anger, and she quickly stepped forward to diffuse the situation. "Mrs. Blackwood, I understand your concern for the family's reputation. Perhaps you'd like to speak with Mr. Turner directly about the arrangements." "Oh, I intend to," Mrs. Blackwood replied curtly. "In the meantime, I think it would be wise for you to consider the impact your presence might have on these poor children standing in the community." After Mrs. Blackwood left, promising to return when Mr. Turner was available for a serious conversation, Clara found herself shaking with a mixture of anger and anxiety. Sarah, who had remained silent during the woman's departure, finally exploded with indignation. "How dare she?" Sarah burst out. "How dare she come into our home and suggest there's something improper about you being here? You've done more for this family in 6 weeks than she's done in the 6 months since Mama died." Clara appreciated Sarah's defense, but she also recognized the truth in Mrs. Blackwood's warning. As an unmarried woman living in a widower's house, she was vulnerable to exactly the kind of gossip that could destroy both her reputation and the Turner family's standing in the community. "Sarah," she said gently, "Mrs. Blackwood isn't entirely wrong. People will talk about this arrangement, and that talk could hurt your family." "I don't care what people say," Sarah declared fiercely. "You belong here. We need you here." "But—" Clara could see the worry in the girl's eyes, and she knew that Sarah did care about her family's reputation, even if she was too loyal to admit it. The Turner children had already endured enough loss and upheaval. They didn't deserve to become the subject of scandal because of her presence. That evening, when Mr. Turner returned from the fields, Clara could tell by his expression that he had already heard about Mrs. Blackwood's visit. Samuel and Jessie were upstairs doing their lessons, while Maggie helped Sarah set the table, leaving Clara alone with him in the kitchen. Mrs. Blackwood paid me a visit at the mill this afternoon, he said, without preamble, hanging his coat on the hook by the door. She had some very pointed questions about our household arrangements. Clara felt her stomach clench with anxiety. Mr. Turner, I hope you understand that I would never do anything to compromise your family's reputation. If my presence here is causing problems. The only problem, he interrupted, his voice tight with controlled anger, is that this community seems to have nothing better to do than speculate about a family that's trying to heal from a terrible loss. Clara was surprised by the vehemence in his tone. In the weeks she had been living here, she had rarely seen him express such strong emotion about anything other than his children's welfare. Nevertheless, she said carefully, Mrs. Blackwood raised some valid concerns. An unmarried woman living in your house. People will draw their own conclusions. Mr. Turner looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. And what conclusions might those be? Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks again. That our relationship is more than professional. And would that be so terrible? The question hung in the air between them, and Clara found herself staring at him in confusion. Was he asking hypothetically, or was there something more personal behind his words? That is, she stammered, unsure how to respond. It would be terrible for your children, Mr. Turner. They've already lost their mother. They don't need to lose their standing in the community as well. His expression softened. You're right, of course. The children's welfare must come first. He paused, then added quietly, but I want you to know that I don't regret bringing you here, regardless of what people like Mrs. Blackwood might say. Before Clara could respond, the children returned to the kitchen for supper, and the conversation was tabled. But throughout the meal, she found herself stealing glances at Mr. Turner, trying to decipher the meaning behind his words. Over the following weeks, the weight of community scrutiny became increasingly oppressive. At church on Sundays, Clara felt the stares of other parishioners and heard the whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when she passed. The Turner children began coming home from school with reports of teasing and pointed questions from their classmates about their housemaid. Samuel, in particular, seemed to suffer from the gossip. One afternoon, he came home with a bloody nose and torn clothing, though he refused to explain what had happened. It was only when Jessie innocently mentioned that some older boys had been calling their family names that Clara understood her sensitive 12-year-old had been fighting to defend their household's honor. Samuel, she said that evening, as she tended to his bruised face, you don't need to fight people who say unkind things about our family. Yes, I do, he replied fiercely. They said you were Papa's. They said horrible things. I couldn't just let them talk about you that way. Clara's heart broke for this boy who felt compelled to defend her reputation with his fists. Oh, Samuel, you sweet, brave boy. I appreciate you wanting to protect me, but I don't want you getting hurt because of gossip. It's not fair, he said, his voice cracking with emotion. You've made our family better. Papa smiles sometimes now, and Sarah doesn't cry every night. And Jessie isn't sad all the time. Why can't people see that? Clara pulled him into a gentle embrace, careful not to aggravate his injuries. Sometimes people are afraid of things they don't understand, and sometimes they judge situations based on appearances rather than reality. Are you going to leave because of what people are saying? The question, asked in Samuel's small, worried voice, cut straight to Clara's heart. She had been considering exactly that possibility, wondering if her departure might be the best solution for everyone involved. I don't want to leave, she said honestly. This family has become very important to me, but I also don't want my presence to cause problems for any of you. Please don't go, Samuel whispered. We need you here. That night, Clara lay awake, wrestling with her conscience. The practical part of her mind argued that leaving would be the wisest course of action. She could find employment elsewhere, perhaps with a family where her presence wouldn't cause scandal. The Turner children were healing and becoming more self-sufficient. They might be able to manage without her. But her heart rebelled against the logic. This family had given her something she had never expected to find, a sense of belonging and purpose that went far beyond mere employment. The children had come to depend on her not just for practical care, but for emotional support and guidance. And if she was honest with herself, her feelings for Mr. Turner had grown beyond professional respect into something deeper and more complicated. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor that would force Clara to confront the reality of her situation. Her father, Jeremiah O'Connell, appeared at the Turner door with his hat in his hands and an expression of grim determination on his weathered face. "Clara," he said when she opened the door, "we need to talk." Clara's heart sank as she led him into the front parlor, away from the children who were finishing their breakfast in the kitchen. She had not seen her father since the day he had arranged for her placement with the Turner family, and his unexpected appearance could only mean trouble. "Papa," she said carefully, "what brings you here?" Jeremiah's eyes swept over the comfortable room with its fine furniture and evident prosperity, and Clara could see him calculating the value of what surrounded them. "I've been hearing stories, Clara. Stories about you living in sin with a widowed man, playing house with his children like you're his wife." Clara felt anger flare in her chest. "I am employed here as a housekeeper and caretaker for the children. There is nothing sinful about my arrangements with Mr. Turner. Living under the same roof as a man you're not married to is sinful enough," Jeremiah replied sternly, "and it's causing talk that reflects poorly on our family name." "Our family name?" Clara couldn't keep the bitterness out of her voice. "You mean the same family name that was willing to sell me to the highest bidder 6 months ago?" Jeremiah's face flushed with anger. "I did what I had to do to ensure your survival, and now I'm doing what I have to do to preserve what's left of your reputation." Clara felt a chill of premonition. "What do you mean?" "You're coming home with me," he announced. "Today, I've made arrangements for you to work for the Presbyterian minister's family in town. It's a proper position, with proper supervision, and no opportunity for scandal." "No," Clara said firmly, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. "I'm not going anywhere. The Turner family needs me, and I'm happy here." "You don't have a choice in the matter," Jeremiah replied coldly. "You're my daughter, and you'll do as I say." Before Clara could respond, Mr. Turner appeared in the doorway of the parlor, his expression dark with controlled anger. "Mr. O'Connell," he said with forced politeness, "I understand you have concerns about your daughter's employment here." Jeremiah straightened to his full height, trying to match Mr. Turner's imposing presence. "I do indeed, sir. The current arrangement is inappropriate and harmful to my daughter's reputation." "I can assure you that Miss O'Connell's reputation is safe in my household," Mr. Turner replied evenly. "She is treated with the utmost respect and propriety. Living in your house, caring for your children, taking on the role of wife and mother, without the benefit of marriage, how is that proper?" Clara saw Mr. Turner's jaw tighten at the accusation, and she stepped forward before the confrontation could escalate. "Papa, Mr. Turner has been nothing but honorable in his treatment of me. I have my own room, my own space, and complete autonomy in how I perform my duties." "The appearances matter as much as the reality," Jeremiah insisted, "and the appearance is that you're living as this man's wife, without the sanction of God or law." The words hung heavily in the air, and Clara felt the weight of community judgment pressing down on her like a physical force. She looked at Mr. Turner and saw the conflict in his eyes, his desire to defend her warring with his recognition that her father's accusations contained a grain of uncomfortable truth. "Perhaps," Mr. Turner said slowly. "We should discuss this matter privately, Mr. O'Connell. Miss O'Connell, would you mind giving us a few minutes alone?" Clara wanted to protest, to insist that any decisions about her future should include her input, but she could see that both men had already moved beyond her preferences to focus on what they considered proper and practical. With a heavy heart, she left them to their negotiations, wondering if this was how her brief period of happiness and belonging would come to an end. Clara retreated to the kitchen, where the Turner children were finishing their breakfast, trying to hide her distress behind a facade of normalcy. But Sarah, who had developed an acute sensitivity to emotional undercurrents in the household, immediately noticed something was wrong. "Miss O'Connell," she said quietly, setting down her coffee cup, "who was that man Papa was talking to?" "My father," Clara replied, her voice tight with worry. "He came to discuss my situation here." Samuel looked up from his arithmetic. "Homework," his expression immediately clouding with concern. "What kind of discussion?" Clara hesitated, unwilling to burden the children with her problems, but also recognizing that they deserved some explanation for what was happening in their home. "Some people in the community have been talking about my living here, and my father is concerned about my reputation." "What's wrong with your reputation?" Maggie asked innocently. "You're the nicest person I know." Clara's heart clenched at the girl's simple faith in her goodness. "Thank you, sweetheart, but some people think it's improper for an unmarried woman to live in the same house as your father." Sarah's face flushed with anger. "That's ridiculous. You have your own room, and you're here to take care of us, not for anything improper." "I know that, and you know that," Clara said gently, "but other people see what they want to see, and they draw their own conclusions." Jesse, who had been quietly eating his porridge, suddenly looked up with wide, frightened eyes. "Are you going to leave us?" The question that Clara had been dreading hung in the air like a sword above her head. She wanted to reassure him, to promise that she would never abandon them, but she couldn't make commitments that might be beyond her control. "I don't want to leave," she said honestly. "But sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions based on what's best for everyone involved." "What's best for us is for you to stay," Samuel said fiercely. "We need you here. We're a family now." Clara felt tears prick her eyes at his passionate declaration. In the months she had been with the Turners, she had indeed begun to feel like part of a family, not just an employee, but someone who belonged, someone who was valued for who she was, rather than just what she could do. The sound of raised voices from the parlor drew everyone's attention, and Clara could hear her father's voice growing more insistent, while Mr. Turner's remained dangerously quiet. She had learned that Elijah Turner was most dangerous when he was calm, his anger simmering beneath a controlled surface. "Miss O'Connell," Sarah said, with the dignity of someone far beyond her 15 years, "I want you to know that whatever happens, you've been the best thing that's come into our lives since Mama died. You've helped us heal, and you've made this house feel like a home again." Samuel nodded emphatically. "And you've made Papa smile again. I hadn't seen him really smile since Mama died, but now he does, especially when he's talking to you." Clara felt a flush of warmth at this observation, remembering the moments when she had caught Mr. Turner looking at her with something deeper than professional appreciation. There had been evenings when they sat by the fire after the children were in bed, talking quietly about their plans for the farm or sharing stories from their pasts, when she had felt a connection that went far beyond their practical arrangement. The voices in the parlor suddenly stopped, and Clara heard the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway. A moment later, her father appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face set in grim lines of determination. "Clara," he said firmly, "get your things. We're leaving." "No," Clara said, the word emerging with more strength than she had expected. "I'm not going anywhere." Jeremiah's face darkened with anger. "You will do as I say, girl. I'm your father, and I have the authority." "You forfeited your authority over me when you sold me like livestock," Clara interrupted, her own anger finally finding its voice. "I am not your property to be moved around at will. You are your daughter, and as long as you're unmarried, you remain under my protection and guidance." "Protection?" Clara's voice rose with indignation. "Where was your protection when you advertised me in the newspaper like a piece of farm equipment? Where was your guidance when you sent me away because feeding me became inconvenient?" The Turner children watched this confrontation with wide eyes, and Clara could see them beginning to understand the circumstances that had brought her into their lives. Sarah's expression had grown increasingly angry as she listened to Jeremiah's words, while Samuel looked ready to physically defend Clara from her own father. Mr. Turner appeared behind Jeremiah, his face carefully neutral, but his eyes flashing with controlled fury. "Mr. O'Connell," he said with deadly calm, "I think it's time for you to leave." "Not without my daughter," Jeremiah replied stubbornly. "I won't have her reputation destroyed by this inappropriate arrangement." "Then perhaps," said a new voice from the kitchen doorway, "we should discuss a solution that would satisfy everyone's concerns about propriety." Everyone turned to see Reverend Thomas MacLeod, the elderly Scottish minister who served the small community church. His presence in the kitchen was unexpected, but somehow inevitable, given the way news travelled in their small community. "Reverend MacLeod," Mr. Turner said with surprise, "what brings you here?" The white-haired minister stepped into the kitchen, his kind eyes taking in the scene before him. "Mrs. Blackwood paid me a visit this morning, expressing her concerns about the spiritual welfare of this household. I thought perhaps I should come and assess the situation for myself." Clara felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment at having her personal business become the subject of church discussion, but Reverend MacLeod's gentle demeanour suggested he had come as a friend rather than a judge. "And what is your assessment?" "Reverend," Mr. Turner asked carefully, "I see a family that has been blessed with healing and hope after a time of great sorrow," the minister replied. "I see children who are thriving under the care of someone who clearly loves them, and I see two adults who have found comfort and purpose in supporting each other through difficult circumstances." Jeremiah shifted uncomfortably at this positive assessment. "That may be so, Reverend, but the appearances—" "Ah, yes, the appearances," Reverend MacLeod interrupted with a slight smile. "It's interesting how concerned we become with appearances when the reality is so much more important. But if appearances are truly the issue, then perhaps there's a simple solution." Clara felt her heart begin to race as she sensed where the conversation was heading. Beside her, she could feel Mr. Turner's tension increasing as well. "What solution would that be?" he asked quietly. Reverend MacLeod looked between Clara and Mr. Turner with knowing eyes. "Marriage, of course. If Miss O'Connell were to become Mrs. Turner, all questions of propriety would be resolved, and the children would have the security of knowing their family was permanent and legitimate." The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge, and Clara felt the eyes of everyone in the room focused on her and Mr. Turner. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it, and her mouth had gone completely dry. That's not necessary," she stammered, though even as she said the words, she felt a deep longing for exactly what the Reverend was suggesting. Mr. Turner was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on Clara with an intensity that made her feel exposed and vulnerable. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "Reverend MacLeod, while I appreciate your concern for our situation, marriage is not a decision to be made lightly or for the convenience of others." "Of course not," the minister agreed, "but neither should it be dismissed when it could provide a solution that benefits everyone involved. Miss O'Connell, what are your thoughts on the matter?" Clara felt trapped between hope and terror. The idea of becoming Mrs. Turner, of truly belonging to this family she had come to love, was everything she had secretly dreamed of, but never dared to voice. But she also knew that a marriage based on social pressure rather than mutual affection would be a recipe for misery. She began, then stopped, looking around at the faces watching her. Sarah's expression was hopeful. Samuel and Maggie looked excited at the prospect, and even Jessie was nodding enthusiastically. Only her father appeared disapproving, though she suspected that was more about losing control over her than genuine concern for her welfare. "I think," she said carefully, "that marriage should be based on more than just solving problems of reputation." Mr. Turner's expression softened at her words, and she thought she saw a flicker of disappointment in his eyes. "Miss O'Connell is right," he said. "Marriage is a sacred commitment that requires more foundation than social convenience." Jeremiah stepped forward, his face red with frustration. "This is all beside the point. Clara, you're coming home with me today, and that's final." "No, Papa," Clara said, finding her strength again. "I'm not a child anymore, and I'm not your property. I'm staying here because this family needs me, and because I choose to stay. You have no legal right to make that choice." "Actually," Mr. Turner interrupted quietly, "she does." He turned to Clara with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Miss O'Connell, would you consider a marriage of convenience? Not for love or romance, but as a practical arrangement that would give you legal independence from your father and provide my children with a permanent mother figure?" Clara's heart sank, even as relief flooded through her. A marriage of convenience would solve the immediate problems, but it would also lock her into a loveless arrangement with a man she was rapidly falling in love with. Still, it would allow her to stay with the children who had become her world, and it would protect her from her father's attempts to control her future. She began, then looked around at the Turner children's faces. Sarah was watching, her with barely concealed hope, while Samuel and Maggie were practically bouncing with excitement. Jessie had moved closer to her side and was now holding her hand with both of his small ones. "Please, say yes," Jessie whispered. "We want you to be our real mama." Clara's heart broke and soared simultaneously at the little boy's words. These children, who had already lost so much, were offering her their hearts and their trust. How could she refuse them for the sake of her own romantic fantasies? "If Mr. Turner is certain that's what he wants," she said quietly, "then yes, I would be honored to marry him." Mr. Turner nodded formally, though she thought she saw relief in his eyes. Then it settled. "Reverend MacLeod, would you be willing to perform the ceremony?" "It would be my pleasure," the minister replied with a warm smile. "Shall we say next Sunday after the regular service? That would give the community time to adjust to the idea and prevent any further gossip." Jeremiah looked furious at this turn of events, but there was little he could do to prevent his adult daughter from marrying if she chose to. "Clara," he said coldly, "if you go through with this foolishness, don't expect to come running back to your family when it fails." "I won't," Clara replied, with more confidence than she felt. "This is my family now." After her father left, in a storm of angry muttering, and Reverend MacLeod departed with promises to make the necessary arrangements, Clara found herself alone in the kitchen with the Turner family. The reality of what had just happened was beginning to sink in, and she felt a mixture of excitement and terror at the path her life was about to take. "Are you really going to be our mama?" Maggie asked, her eyes shining with hope. "If that's what you want," Clara replied, kneeling down to the girl's level. "But you need to understand that no one can ever replace your real mama. I'll be a different kind of mother, but I hope I can love you just as much." "We already love you," Samuel said simply, "and you already take care of us like a mama. Now it will just be official." Sarah approached more cautiously, her expression serious. "Miss O'Connell." "Clara, I want you to know that I'm glad this is happening. You've made our family whole again, and I can't imagine life without you now." Clara stood and pulled Sarah into a warm embrace, feeling tears of happiness sting her eyes. "I can't imagine life without all of you either," she said. "You've given me something I never thought I'd have, a real home and a real family." As the children chattered excitedly about the upcoming wedding and what it would mean for their family, Clara caught Mr. Turner watching her with an unreadable expression. When their eyes met, he approached her slowly. "Miss O'Connell," he said quietly, "I want you to understand what this arrangement will and won't be. I'm offering you my name and my protection and a permanent place in this family. In return, I hope you'll continue to care for my children as you have been doing." Clara nodded, though her heart ached at the businesslike tone of his words. "I understand, Mr. Turner. It's a practical arrangement, nothing more." Something flickered in his eyes at her words, but his expression remained carefully neutral. "I want you to know that you'll have your own room, your own space, and complete autonomy in household matters. I won't expect. That is, I won't assume." Clara felt herself blushing as she understood what he was trying to say. "I understand," she said quickly. "This is a marriage of convenience, not a romantic arrangement." "Exactly," he said, though his voice sounded oddly strained. "I just want to make sure we both understand the terms before we make this commitment." Clara nodded again, though part of her wished desperately that he would give some sign that his feelings for her went beyond mere practicality, but she reminded herself that she was getting everything she had truly hoped for: a permanent place with the children she loved, legal independence from her father, and the protection of marriage. If love wasn't part of the bargain, she would learn to be content with what she had. That evening, as Clara tucked Jessie into bed, the little boy looked up at her with his serious blue eyes. "Clara, when you marry Papa, will you love him like Mama did?" The innocent question hit Clara like a physical blow, forcing her to confront feelings she had been trying to suppress. She began, then stopped, unsure how to explain the complexities of adult relationships to a 7-year-old. "I already care about your papa very much," she said finally, "and I hope that over time we'll learn to love each other the way married people should." Jessie smiled sleepily. "Good. Papa needs someone to love him. He's been sad for so long." As Clara kissed Jessie goodnight and prepared for bed herself, she reflected on the dramatic changes that had occurred in a single day. Tomorrow she would begin preparing for a wedding that would change her life forever. In a week, she would become Mrs. Elijah Turner, gaining not only a husband but legal independence and permanent belonging with the family she had come to love. The arrangement might be born of practicality rather than passion, but Clara allowed herself to hope that perhaps in time something deeper might grow between her and the man who was offering her his name and protection. For now, it was enough to know that she would never again face the uncertainty and rejection that had defined her life before coming to the Turner farm. As she drifted off to sleep in what would soon be her last week as a single woman, Clara whispered a prayer of gratitude for the unexpected turns that had brought her to this moment. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them as part of a family, with the security of knowing she truly belonged somewhere at last. The week leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparations and barely suppressed emotions. Clara found herself caught between the practical necessities of organizing a ceremony and the overwhelming complexity of her feelings about marrying a man who viewed their union as nothing more than a business arrangement. The children, oblivious to the adult tensions surrounding the situation, threw themselves into wedding preparations with enthusiastic joy that both warmed and broke Clara's heart. Sarah had taken charge of altering one of her mother's dresses for Clara to wear, working late into the evenings by lamplight to adjust the beautiful blue silk gown that had been Rebecca Turner's finest dress. The symbolic weight of wearing the dead woman's clothes was not lost on Clara, but when Sarah offered the dress with tears in her eyes, saying that her mother would have wanted Clara to wear something special, she could not refuse. "Mama always said this dress made her feel like a queen," Sarah confided as she pinned the hemline. "She wore it to church socials and harvest dances, and Papa always told her she was the most beautiful woman in the county when she had it on." Clara stood perfectly still as Sarah worked, trying not to think about Elijah Turner telling his beloved wife how beautiful she looked, trying not to imagine the love and desire that had once filled his eyes when he looked at Rebecca in this very dress. Their marriage would be so different from what he had shared with his first wife, practical, convenient, emotionally distant. The thought made her chest ache with longing for something she knew she could never have. "Sarah," she said carefully, "how do you feel about your father marrying again, truly?" Sarah paused in her sewing, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I think Mama would want Papa to be happy again," she said finally, "and she would want us to have someone who loves us the way you do. But—" She hesitated, then continued in a rush. "Sometimes I feel guilty for being glad about it, like I'm betraying Mama's memory by wanting you to stay permanently." Clara's heart went out to this girl who was navigating such complex emotions with remarkable maturity. "Loving me doesn't mean you love your mother any less," she said gently. "The heart has room for many different kinds of love, and each one is precious and unique. Do you think Papa will ever love you the way he loved Mama?" The question Clara had been asking herself was even more painful coming from Sarah's innocent lips. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "But I hope that, in time, we might find our own kind of love, even if it's different from what he shared with your mother." The truth was that Clara was already desperately in love with Elijah Turner, though she had carefully hidden her feelings from everyone, including herself, for as long as possible. She loved his quiet strength, his devotion to his children, his gentle hands that could coax life from the soil or comfort a frightened child with equal skill. She loved the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the deep rumble of his laugh when Jesse told one of his elaborate stories, and the careful consideration he gave to every decision that affected his family. But she also knew that his heart still belonged to Rebecca, and she feared that her own feelings would only make their practical arrangement more painful for both of them. Better to accept what he was offering, security, belonging, protection, and try to be grateful for that, rather than longing for something that might never be possible. 3 days before the wedding, Clara's fragile peace was shattered by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. She was in the garden, harvesting the last of the winter vegetables with Maggie's enthusiastic help, when a familiar figure appeared at the gate. Margaret O'Connell stood uncertainly at the edge of the property, her worn shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders and her face drawn with exhaustion and worry. "Mama!" Clara straightened slowly, her hands still dirty from the soil, staring at the woman who had given birth to her but had shown so little maternal affection in recent years. Margaret's eyes swept over the prosperous farm, taking in the well-maintained buildings, the healthy livestock, and the obvious signs of comfortable living. When her gaze finally settled on Clara, her expression was a complex mixture of relief, regret, and something that might have been pride. "Clara," she said quietly, "you look, well, happy." Clara felt a flood of conflicting emotions at seeing her mother again. Part of her wanted to run to Margaret's arms, to feel some echo of the maternal comfort she had craved for so long. But a larger part remained wary, remembering too clearly the cold practicality with which her parents had arranged her departure from their home. "Mama," she said carefully, "what are you doing here?" Margaret shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting around as if looking for an escape route. "I heard about the wedding, from your father. He came home, upset, about your decision to marry Mr. Turner." "And what do you think about my decision?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment, studying Clara's face with an intensity that was both familiar and strange. "I think," she said finally, "that you found something here that we could never give you. Security, respect, a place where you belong." Clara felt tears prick her eyes at her mother's words. This was the closest thing to an apology she was likely to receive, and despite everything, it meant something to hear her mother acknowledge that Clara had found a better life than what their family had been able to provide. "Would you like to come inside?" Clara asked, though part of her dreaded the complications her mother's presence might create. "Meet the children? See the house?" Margaret shook her head, her expression growing more anxious. "I can't stay long. Your father doesn't know I'm here, and if he found out—" She trailed off, but Clara understood the implication. Jeremiah O'Connell would not approve of his wife showing what might be construed as support for Clara's rebellion against his authority. "Why did you come, Mama?" Margaret reached into her worn reticule and pulled out a small, wrapped bundle. "I brought you this," she said, holding it out with trembling hands. "It was your grandmother's. I've been saving it for... well, I thought perhaps your wedding day would be appropriate." Clara accepted the bundle with careful hands, unwrapping the cloth to reveal a delicate silver bracelet set with small pearls. It was the most beautiful piece of jewelry she had ever seen, and she remembered her grandmother wearing it on special occasions when Clara was very young. "Mama, I can't take this," she protested, though her fingers caressed the smooth silver. With reverence, "This belongs to the family." "You are family," Margaret said firmly, her voice stronger than Clara had heard it in years. "No matter what your father says, no matter how angry he gets about your choices, you're still my daughter, and this belongs to you." Clara felt tears streaming down her face as she looked at the bracelet, understanding the risk her mother had taken in bringing it to her. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll treasure it always." Margaret stepped forward then and pulled Clara into a fierce embrace, holding her tightly for a moment before stepping back with tears in her own eyes. "Be happy, Clara. Be happy in a way that your father and I never learned how to be." After her mother left, Clara sat in the garden, holding the silver bracelet and crying for everything that had been lost and gained in the past year. Maggie, who had watched the entire encounter with wide, curious eyes, came and sat beside her on the cold ground. "Was that your mama?" Maggie asked with characteristic directness. "Yes," Clara replied, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. "That was my mama. She seemed sad." Clara considered this observation, recognizing the truth in it. "I think she is sad, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that seem right at the time, but cause sadness later. Like when Papa decided to work all the time after our mama died." Clara was struck by the child's insight. "Yes, exactly like that. People handle difficult situations in different ways, and sometimes those ways create more problems." "But Papa's better now," Maggie said confidently, "because you came and helped him remember how to be happy again. Maybe your mama will get better too." Clara hugged the little girl, marveling at her ability to find hope and healing in even the most complex situations. "Maybe she will," she agreed, though she suspected that her parents' capacity for change was far more limited than Elijah Turner's had proven to be. That evening, as Clara showed the children her grandmother's bracelet and told them stories about the woman who had once worn it, She noticed Elijah watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. When the children had gone to bed and they were left alone in the kitchen, he approached her where she stood washing the supper dishes. "Your mother's visit was unexpected," he said quietly, taking up a dish towel to help dry the plates. "It was," Clara agreed, unsure how much of her conversation with Margaret she should share. "She wanted to wish me well and give me something that belonged to my grandmother." Elijah nodded, working in comfortable silence for a few minutes before speaking again. "Clara, I want you to know that if you're having second thoughts about our arrangement, it's not too late to change your mind. If your mother's visit has made you reconsider." Clara turned to look at him in surprise, noting the tension in his shoulders and the careful neutrality of his expression. "Do you want me to reconsider? I want you to be certain that you're making this choice freely, not because you feel trapped or because you have no other options." Clara set down the plate she had been washing and turned to face him fully. "Elijah," she said, using his first name deliberately, "I'm choosing to marry you because I want to be part of this family, not because I have to, but because I want to." Something shifted in his expression at her words, and for a moment she thought she saw something deeper than mere relief in his eyes. "I'm glad," he said simply. "The children, we've come to depend on you more than is probably wise." "Depending on people isn't unwise," Clara replied. "It's human. We're meant to need each other." Elijah studied her face in the lamplight, and Clara felt her breath catch at the intensity of his gaze. "You're a remarkable woman, Clara O'Connell," he said softly. "My children are fortunate to have you in their lives." "And what about you?" The question slipped out before Clara could stop herself, and she immediately felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I mean, do you think you're fortunate to have me in your life?" Elijah was quiet for so long that Clara began to regret asking the question. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "More than you know." The words hung between them, heavy with possibility and unspoken emotion. Clara felt her heart racing as she searched his face for some sign of what he was really feeling. But before either of them could say anything more, the sound of Jessie calling out from upstairs broke the spell. "Papa, Clara, I had a bad dream." Elijah stepped back immediately, the moment of intimacy shattered by the call of parental duty. "I'll go to him," he said, his voice returning to its usual careful control. As Clara watched him climb the stairs, to comfort his son, she pressed her fingers to her racing heart and wondered if she had imagined the depth of emotion she had seen in his eyes. 2 more days until the wedding, and then she would discover what it truly meant to be married to a man who might be capable of loving her, but who was too honorable to pursue such feelings given the practical nature of their arrangement. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure, and as she finished cleaning the kitchen and prepared for bed, Clara found herself praying that somehow, despite all the barriers between them, she and Elijah might find their way to something deeper than mere convenience. The silver bracelet on her wrist caught the lamplight as she moved, a tangible reminder that love and beauty could survive even the most difficult circumstances, and that sometimes the most precious gifts came when they were least expected. The morning of Clara's wedding dawned grey and cold, with a light snow falling that transformed the Turner farm into a winter wonderland. Clara woke before sunrise, her stomach churning with a mixture of anticipation and terror that made eating breakfast impossible. In a few hours, she would become Mrs. Elijah Turner, bound by law and custom to a man who had offered her his name and protection, but not his heart. Sarah appeared at her door while she was still in her nightgown, carrying a cup of tea and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. "I couldn't sleep either," she confessed, settling on the edge of Clara's bed. I kept thinking about how different everything is going to be after today. Different how? Clara asked, accepting the tea gratefully and hoping it would settle. Her nervous stomach. Well, you'll really be our mother then, Sarah said with a smile. Not just someone taking care of us, but truly part of our family. And maybe, she hesitated, then continued with teenage hopefulness. Maybe Papa will start to heal completely. He's been better since you came, but I can tell he's still holding back, still protecting himself from being hurt again. Clara's heart clenched. At Sarah's words, recognizing the truth in them, Elijah had indeed grown warmer and more open over the months she had been with his family, but there remained a careful distance in his interactions with her, as if he was afraid to let himself care too deeply for someone who might leave him as Rebecca had, though not by choice. Sarah, Clara said carefully, you need to understand that your father and I are entering into this marriage for practical reasons. I don't want you to have unrealistic expectations about what it will be like. Sarah's expression grew more serious, and Clara was reminded again of how this girl had been forced to mature beyond her years. I know what you both say about it being practical, she said quietly, but I see how Papa looks at you when he thinks no one is watching, and I see how you look at him too. Maybe you both started with practical reasons, but that doesn't mean other feelings haven't grown. Before Clara could respond to this uncomfortably perceptive observation, the sound of voices downstairs indicated that the day's activities were beginning. Maggie's excited chatter carried up the stairs, punctuated by Jessie's higher-pitched questions about the ceremony and Samuel's attempts to maintain order among his siblings. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Clara bathed in the copper tub that the children had hauled up to her room, then allowed Sarah to help her into Rebecca's blue dress, which fit her surprisingly well after the alterations. The silk felt smooth and luxurious against her skin, and when she looked at herself in the small mirror, she was startled by her own reflection. "You look beautiful," Sarah breathed, fastening her grandmother's silver bracelet around Clara's wrist. "Like a real bride." Clara touched the delicate fabric of the dress, wondering what Rebecca Turner had felt when she wore it, whether she had been nervous on her wedding day or confident in her future husband's love. The thought brought a pang of sadness for the woman who had never had the chance to see her children grow up, but also a strange sense of connection, as if Rebecca was somehow blessing this union that would ensure her children's continued care. Maggie burst into the room without knocking, her eyes wide with amazement when she saw Clara. "You look like a princess," she declared, clapping her hands together. "Papa's going to fall over when he sees you." "Maggie," Sarah scolded, but she was smiling. "Ladies don't burst into rooms without permission." "But it's Clara's wedding day," Maggie protested. "Everything's supposed to be special and exciting." Samuel appeared in the doorway, looking uncomfortable in his best clothes, but managing a shy smile when he saw Clara. "The Reverend is here," he announced, "and there are lots of people outside." Clara's stomach lurched with fresh nerves. Word of the wedding had spread through the community, and despite the unconventional circumstances that had led to it, neighbors had come to witness the ceremony. She wondered how many were there out of genuine goodwill, and how many were simply curious about the scandal that had prompted such a hasty marriage. "Are you ready?" Sarah asked gently, offering Clara her arm for support. Clara took a deep breath, looking around at the children who had become her heart's home. "I'm ready," she said, and realized that despite her nerves, she meant it. The ceremony was to take place in the front parlor, which Sarah and the boys had decorated with pine boughs and candles that filled the room with warm, flickering light. When Clara descended the stairs, she could see through the parlor doorway that the room was indeed full of neighbors, some of whom she recognized from church and others who were strangers to her. But her attention was immediately captured by the sight of Elijah Turner standing beside Reverend MacLeod near the fireplace. He wore his best dark suit and had obviously taken care with his appearance, his dark hair neatly combed and his face freshly shaven. When he looked up and saw her on the stairs, his expression of careful composure slipped for just a moment, revealing something that might have been awe or desire, or perhaps simply surprise at how she looked in his dead wife's dress. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities, before Elijah seemed to remember himself and resumed his polite, distant expression. But Clara had seen that flash of something deeper, and it gave her hope that perhaps Sarah was right about feelings that neither of them had been willing to acknowledge. Jesse appeared at her side, wearing his most serious expression and carrying a small bouquet of winter greenery that he had gathered from the woods. "For you," he said solemnly, presenting the bouquet with the gravity of a knight offering a tribute to his queen. "Thank you, sweetheart," Clara said, accepting the simple bouquet and feeling tears prick her eyes at the thoughtful gesture. "It's perfect." With Sarah on one side and Jessie on the other, Clara walked into the parlor, where her new life was waiting. The assembled neighbors watched with expressions ranging from benevolent approval to barely concealed curiosity. But Clara found that she didn't care what they thought. Her focus was entirely on Elijah and the children who would soon officially become her family. Reverend MacLeod smiled warmly as she approached, his kind eyes reflecting genuine happiness at the union he was about to perform. "Dearly beloved," he began, his Scottish accent lending gravity to the familiar words, "we are gathered here today to witness the joining of Elijah Turner and Clara O'Connell in holy matrimony." The ceremony proceeded according to tradition, but Clara found herself struggling to focus on the Reverend's words. Her attention kept drifting to Elijah's face, searching for some sign of his true feelings about what they were doing. His expression remained carefully neutral, but she noticed that his hands trembled slightly when he reached for hers during the exchange of vows. "Do you, Elijah Turner, take Clara O'Connell to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Elijah said, his voice steady and clear, though Clara thought she detected a slight tremor underneath the words. "And do you, Clara O'Connell, take Elijah Turner to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live?" Clara looked into Elijah's brown eyes and saw her own hopes and fears reflected there. "I do," she said, her voice soft but certain. The exchange of rings was simple. Elijah had given her his mother's wedding band, a simple gold circle worn smooth by years of wear. As he slipped it onto her finger, his touch was gentle and careful, and Clara felt a jolt of electricity at the contact that had nothing to do with the formality of the ceremony. "By the power vested in me by God and the state of Michigan," Reverend MacLeod announced with obvious satisfaction, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Elijah, you may kiss your bride." This was the moment Clara had been both anticipating and dreading. She and Elijah had never kissed, had barely touched beyond the most necessary contact, and now they were expected to seal their union with a kiss in front of a room full of witnesses. Elijah stepped closer, his eyes searching her face as if asking, "Permission?" Clara gave the slightest nod, and he leaned down to press his lips gently to hers. The kiss was brief and chaste, appropriate for the public setting, but Clara felt her heart race at the contact and thought she detected a slight intake of breath from Elijah that suggested he was not entirely unaffected either. The parlor erupted in applause and congratulations, and Clara found herself swept into a whirlwind of handshakes and well wishes from neighbors who seemed genuinely pleased by the match. Mrs. Blackwood, notably absent from the ceremony, had apparently been overruled by the majority of the community, who appeared to view the marriage as a sensible solution to a difficult situation. The celebration continued for several hours, with neighbors contributing dishes for an impromptu wedding feast. Clara moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and trying to adjust to being addressed as Mrs. Turner, a title that felt both foreign and thrilling. The Turner children, her children now, she reminded herself, stayed close to her throughout the afternoon, beaming with pride at having their family officially complete again. As evening approached and the last of the neighbors departed, Clara found herself alone with her new family in the quiet kitchen. The reality of her changed circumstances was beginning to sink in, bringing with it a mixture of joy and uncertainty about what would happen next. "Well," Elijah said after a moment of silence, "I suppose that makes it official." "I suppose it does," Clara agreed, twisting her new wedding ring around her finger and marveling at how strange it felt to wear jewelry that marked her as belonging to someone. The children seemed unsure how to behave around this new version of their family dynamic. Sarah kept glancing between Clara and her father as if looking for signs of change, while Samuel and Maggie appeared more subdued than usual. Only Jesse seemed entirely comfortable with the new arrangement, having attached himself to Clara's side and showing no inclination to let go. "Children," Elijah said finally, "why don't you get ready for bed? It's been a long day, and tomorrow is still a school day." As the children reluctantly prepared to leave the kitchen, Sarah approached Clara with an expression of barely contained emotion. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for choosing us, for choosing to stay and be our family." Clara pulled the girl into a warm embrace, feeling tears sting her eyes at the simple gratitude in Sarah's voice. "Thank you for letting me," she replied, "for accepting me as part of your family." One by one, the children said their good nights, each one hugging Clara with an extra tenderness that suggested they understood the significance of the day's events. When Jessie lingered for an extra moment in her arms, she whispered in his ear, "I love you, sweetheart. All of you. You're my children now, and I'll never leave you." Jessie pulled back to look at her with his serious blue eyes. "Promise." "I promise," Clara said solemnly, and meant it with every fiber of her being. After the children had gone upstairs, Clara and Elijah were left alone in the kitchen, the silence between them heavy with unspoken thoughts and feelings. Clara began clearing the remnants of the wedding feast, needing something to do with her, hands to combat the nervous energy that threatened to overwhelm her. "Clara," Elijah said softly, and she turned to find him watching her with an expression she had never seen before, vulnerable, uncertain, and something else she didn't dare try to name. "Yes? I want you to know that I don't take what you've done lightly, agreeing to marry me, accepting responsibility for my children, giving up your independence for our welfare. It's more than I had any right to ask." Clara set down the dish she had been holding and turned to face him fully. "You didn't ask me to give up anything, Elijah. You offered me something I never thought I could have. A family, a home, a place where I belong. If anyone should be grateful, it's me." Elijah stepped closer, his eyes intense with emotion. "You don't understand what you've given us. When Rebecca died, I thought our family was broken forever. I thought I would spend the rest of my life going through the motions of living without ever truly feeling alive again. But you brought light back into this house. You helped my children heal, and you helped me remember what it feels like to hope." Clara's heart pounded at the depth of emotion in his voice. "Elijah, I know this marriage started as a practical arrangement," he continued, his voice growing softer, "but I need you to know that my feelings for you go far beyond gratitude or convenience. Before he could finish the sentence, a crash of Thunder outside interrupted his words, followed immediately by the sound of heavy rain beginning to fall. Through the kitchen window, Clara could see that the gentle snow of the morning had turned into a fierce winter storm, with wind whipping the bare branches of the trees and ice beginning to coat the windows. "The animals," Elijah said immediately, his declaration forgotten in the face of practical necessity. "I need to make sure they're secure for the night." "I'll help you," Clara said, reaching for her shawl. "No," Elijah said firmly. "You'll catch your death in this weather. Stay inside where it's warm." But Clara was already wrapping her shawl around her shoulders, her practical nature overriding any concern for her wedding dress. "I'm not made of spun sugar, Elijah. I can help with the animals." Together, they rushed out into the storm, fighting against the wind and ice to secure the barn doors and make sure the livestock had adequate shelter. The work was cold and exhausting, but Clara found herself energized by the shared purpose and the way Elijah naturally included her in the physical demands of farm life. When they finally returned to the house, both of them were soaked and shivering, but Clara felt exhilarated by the adventure and the way they had worked together as a team. As they stood in the kitchen, dripping on the floor and laughing about their bedraggled appearance, Clara realized that this was exactly what she had hoped marriage might be, a partnership built on mutual support and shared responsibility. "You're remarkable," Elijah said suddenly, his eyes bright with admiration as he looked at her disheveled appearance. "Most women would have stayed safely inside and left the work to me." "I'm not most women," Clara replied, wringing water from her hair and feeling suddenly self-conscious about how she must look. "No," Elijah agreed, his voice soft with something that might have been wonder. "You're certainly not." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility and the aftermath of shared adventure. Clara felt her breath catch as Elijah stepped closer, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her heart race. "Clara," he said quietly, "what I was trying to say before the storm." "Yes?" "I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, simple and devastating in their honesty. Clara felt her world tilt and reshape. Around this unexpected confession, her heart soaring with hope, even as her practical mind warned her to be cautious. "Elijah," she whispered, "I think I'm falling in love with you too." 3 months had passed since Clara and Elijah's wedding, and the Turner household had settled into rhythms that felt both natural and precious. The harsh winter had given way to the tentative promise of spring, with crocuses pushing through the last patches of snow and the maple trees beginning to show the faintest hint of green buds. But more significant than the changing seasons was the transformation that had occurred within the walls of the Turner home. Clara's confession of love on their wedding night had opened floodgates of emotion that both she and Elijah had been struggling to contain. Their marriage of convenience had blossomed into something neither of them had dared to hope for. A deep, abiding love built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and the gradual healing of old wounds. The children had noticed the change in their father, the way his smiles came more easily now, and how he and Clara would sometimes catch each other's eyes across the dinner table with expressions of quiet contentment. But their newfound happiness was about to face its greatest test. The trouble began on a crisp March morning, when Clara was hanging laundry on the line behind the house. She noticed a small group of men approaching the farm, their purposeful stride and grim expressions immediately setting her on edge. Leading the group was Jeremiah O'Connell, accompanied by 2 men she didn't recognize, and, most troubling of all, Sheriff William Morrison. Clara's hands stilled on the wet sheet she had been pinning to the line as she watched the group approach the front door. Through the kitchen window, she could see Elijah rising from the breakfast table, where he had been reviewing farm accounts with Samuel. The serious expressions on the men's faces suggested this was not a social call. She quickly finished hanging the sheet and hurried inside, arriving in the front hallway just as Elijah opened the door to greet their unexpected visitors. The children, sensing tension in the air, had gathered at the top of the stairs, where they could observe without being seen. "Mr. Turner," Sheriff Morrison said with obvious reluctance, "I'm afraid I have some unpleasant business to discuss with you." "Sheriff Morrison," Elijah replied evenly, though Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. "What can I do for you?" Jeremiah stepped forward, his face set in lines of righteous indignation. "Mr. Turner, I'm here on behalf of the moral welfare of this community. It has come to our attention that your marriage to my daughter was conducted under false pretenses." Dear Clara felt her blood run cold. "Papa, what are you talking about?" "Don't papa me, girl," Jeremiah snapped. "You've brought shame on our family name with this scandalous arrangement, and now the truth is coming out." One of the unfamiliar men, a thin, officious-looking individual with wire-rimmed spectacles, stepped forward. "I am Aldrich Pemberton, representing the Michigan State Board of Moral Standards. We have received allegations that this marriage is fraudulent, a sham, designed to circumvent laws governing the proper supervision of unmarried women." Clara felt Elijah move protectively closer to her side, his presence providing strength even as her world seemed to crumble around her. "On what grounds are you making these allegations?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "On the grounds," said the second unfamiliar man, "that this marriage was never consummated, that Miss O'Connell, Mrs. Turner, maintains her own separate sleeping quarters, and that the entire arrangement is nothing more than a business transaction masquerading as a holy union." Nudie, Clara's cheeks burned with humiliation at having the intimate details of her marriage discussed by strangers. But more than embarrassment, she felt a surge of protective anger for the children listening upstairs and for Elijah, who was being forced to defend their private choices to a group of moral crusaders. "How dare you," she said, her voice shaking with indignation. "How dare you come into our home and make accusations about our marriage? What Elijah and I do in the privacy of our own home is no one's business but our own." Sheriff Morrison looked uncomfortable with his role in the proceedings, but pressed forward with obvious reluctance. "Mrs. Turner, I'm required to investigate allegations of fraud when they're brought to my attention. These gentlemen claim to have evidence that your marriage is not legitimate." "What evidence?" Elijah demanded, his composure beginning to crack. Aldrich Pemberton pulled out a leather portfolio and extracted several documents. "We have testimony from members of this community stating that Mrs. Turner was observed maintaining her own separate bedroom, that there has been no evidence of marital intimacy, and that the wedding was arranged hastily to avoid scandal rather than from genuine affection." Clara felt tears of rage and humiliation burning her eyes. Someone in their community, someone they had trusted, had been watching their household and reporting on their private arrangements. The violation felt almost as devastating as the accusations themselves. "Furthermore," Pemberton continued, "we have Mr. O'Connell's sworn statement that his daughter was coerced into this arrangement through economic desperation, and that she entered into it under false pretenses." "That's a lie!" Clara burst out, her composure finally breaking. "No one coerced me into anything. I chose to marry Elijah because I love him and his children, and because he offered me something my own family never could: respect, security, and belonging." Jeremiah's face darkened with anger. "Love? Girl, you didn't even know the man 6 months ago. This whole arrangement is nothing but a business transaction designed to give you respectability and him free domestic labor." "You're wrong," came a clear voice from the staircase, and everyone turned to see Sarah descending the stairs with her chin raised defiantly. "You're all wrong about Clara and Papa." "Sarah," Elijah said warningly, "go back upstairs." "No, Papa," Sarah said firmly, continuing down the stairs until she stood beside Clara. "These men are saying terrible things about our family, and I won't let them." Samuel appeared at the top of the stairs, followed by Maggie and Jessie, all of them wearing expressions of protective determination that would have been comical under other circumstances. "Sarah," Sheriff Morrison said more gently, "this is adult business. Children shouldn't be involved." "We're not just children," Sarah replied with dignity beyond her years. "We're this family, and we know the truth about Clara and Papa even if you don't." Aldrich Pemberton looked annoyed by the interruption. "Miss Turner, your loyalty to your stepmother is admirable, but it doesn't change the facts of the situation." "What facts?" Sarah demanded. "The fact that Clara saved our family when we were drowning in grief. The fact that she loves us and takes care of us not because she has to, but because she wants to. The fact that Papa smiles again and laughs again and actually lives again instead of just existing." Clara felt her heart swell with love and pride for this brave girl who was standing up to adult authority to defend their family. Beside her, she could feel Elijah's emotional response to his daughter's passionate defense. "The fact is," said the second unfamiliar man, who had introduced himself as Reverend Dr. Cornelius Hartwell from the State Methodist Conference, "that marriage is a sacred institution with specific requirements and obligations. A union that exists only on paper, without the proper marital relations, is a mockery of God's design." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks at the man's crude implications, but before she could respond, Elijah stepped forward with an expression of controlled fury that made everyone in the room take a step back. "Reverend Dr. Hartwell," he said with deadly calm, "you are speaking about my wife and my family in my own home. I suggest you choose your next words very carefully." The Reverend, perhaps recognizing that he had pushed too far, cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Turner, I mean no disrespect, but the law requires that marriages be legitimate unions, not mere contracts of convenience." "Our marriage is completely legitimate," Elijah said firmly. "Clara is my wife in every sense of the word, and I'll thank you not to imply otherwise." Clara felt a rush of gratitude for Elijah's defense, even as she realized he was stretching the truth for the sake of protecting their family. While their relationship had indeed grown into deep love and affection, their physical intimacy remained limited by Elijah's careful respect for her comfort and their mutual agreement to let their relationship develop naturally. Sheriff Morrison, looking increasingly uncomfortable with the entire situation, consulted his notes reluctantly. "Mr. Turner, these gentlemen have requested a formal investigation into the legitimacy of your marriage. I'm required by law to conduct interviews with both you and your wife separately and to examine any evidence that might support or refute the allegations." "This is outrageous," Clara said, her voice shaking with emotion. "We're being treated like criminals because we didn't conduct our marriage according to other people's expectations." Jeremiah stepped forward again, his face hard with self-righteous conviction. "Clara, this marriage is a sham, and you know it. You're living in sin, play-acting at being a wife and mother to salvage your reputation. It's time to face the truth and come home where you belong." "Home?" Clara's voice rose with incredulous anger. "You mean the home where I was sold like livestock? The home where my own parents advertised me in the newspaper as damaged goods? This is my home now, with people who love and value me as I am." Samuel had crept down the stairs during the heated exchange, and now he stood beside his sister with tears streaming down his face. "Why are you trying to take Clara away from us?" he asked, his young voice breaking with emotion. "She's our mama now, we need her." Maggie appeared at Samuel's side, her usually cheerful face streaked with tears. "Clara makes Papa happy," she said in a small, fierce voice. "Before she came, Papa was sad all the time. Now he laughs and plays with us and reads us stories. Why do you want to make him sad again?" Even Jessie had joined his siblings, clinging to Clara's skirt with both hands and staring at the strange men with frightened eyes. "You can't take our mama away," he said, with the absolute conviction of childhood. "She belongs to us now." Aldrich Pemberton looked unmoved by the children's pleas. "Mr. Turner, while your children's attachment to Mrs. Turner is touching, it doesn't address the legal questions about your marriage. We'll need to conduct a thorough investigation to determine whether this union meets the requirements of Michigan law." "And what exactly would this investigation entail?" Elijah asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Interviews with both parties, examination of the household arrangements, testimony from community members, and a review of the circumstances leading to the marriage," Pemberton replied efficiently. "If the marriage is found to be fraudulent, it will be annulled, and Mrs. Turner will be returned to her father's custody."